Imagine you are an archaeologist, right? And you're digging under a modern concert hall in Switzerland.
Yeah, right in the middle of the city.
Exactly. And you hit this layer of soil that looks completely disturbed. And pretty soon, you uncover a mass grave.
Which is, always a startling find.
Right. And inside, there are 15 bodies. But here's the crazy part. When you examine their spines, you see the severe, crippling arthritis, the kind of wear and tear you would normally associate with an 80-year-old.
Yeah, like a lifetime of really hard labor.
But then you look at their teeth and you realize the oldest person in this entire grave is barely 17.
It's just staggering.
It really is. So today we are looking at a study that answers one very dark question. What on earth happened to these kids?
Well, it's a mystery that it completely unravels one of the most persistent myths we tell ourselves about history.
The idea of the plague as the great equalizer, right?
Exactly. We have this really romanticized notion that a plague or a pandemic is this ultimate leveling force. The prevailing thought is that, a pathogen is purely biological.
Like it doesn't check your Plurk account before it infects you.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't care about your social status.
Yeah.
A king in his castle is supposedly just as vulnerable as a peasant out in the street.
That is the dramatic framing we usually see in movies and textbooks. But as it turns out, that narrative is pretty much myth.
Yeah, completely.
So our mission today is to explore this newly published, really multidisciplinary study in the journal Antiquity. The researchers zeroed in on the last recorded outbreak of the plague in Basel, Switzerland.
Which spanned from 1665 to 1670?
Right. And the evidence they pulled out of the dirt is just stunning. Because for you listening right now, we are about to go on an exploration that weaves together ancient DNA, skeletal forensics, and early modern social politics.
Because to really understand how disease operates, you can't just look at the biology of the bacteria.
Right, you need context.
Yeah, you have to look at the architecture of the society it's infecting.
Yeah.
And 17th century Basel is just the perfect stage for this.
Picture this city, okay? It is an absolutely bustling hub of early modern Europe. And it's entirely reliant on trade.
Commerce was basically the lifeblood of the city.
Exactly. And because of that, the local council had a habit of doing something pretty reckless. Whenever a plague epidemic flared up in the surrounding regions, the council repeatedly refused to close the city gates.
Which is just, it's wild to think about.
Right. They deliberately prioritized trade and economics over quarantine, which, as you can imagine, for the people living there, that practically rolled out the red carpet for the disease.
It was a very calculated economic risk.
Yeah.
And the citizens, well, they paid the biological price for it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what these researchers did goes so far beyond just reading old council minutes or dusty archive papers.
Absolutely. The methodology is incredible.
We are going to uncover exactly why it was the absolute poorest, most vulnerable youths in the city who bore the brutal physical brunt of this disease.
And to do that, we have to start at the physical site itself, the scene of the crime, so to speak.
The Barfüßer Kloster.
Right. Originally, this was a Franciscan monastery founded way back in 1250, I think.
Wow, that is old.
Yeah. But after the Reformation in the 1500s, the monks abandoned the complex and it got repurposed. The cloister and the hermitages were turned into this early asylum and a hospital.
And crucially for our deep dive, the old cloister garden was used as an emergency epidemic cemetery. Basically for when the death toll spiked and they ran out of room.
Yeah. Fast forward to modern times, specifically around 2016 and 2017, there were excavations happening right in the center of Basel for that modern concert hall you mentioned.
Right.
And archaeologists uncovered hundreds of burials. But there was one specific cluster of graves that really caught their attention.
Graves 229 to 232.
Exactly. These are plural burials. They found 15 individuals buried together simultaneously.
And some were in wooden coffins, but some were just wrapped in simple shrouds.
Yeah, very bare bones burials.
But, digging up skeletons is one thing. Pitting them to a specific historical event is a massive challenge. You need a timeline.
And they actually found one, thanks to this incredibly mundane object just lying in the dirt.
Next to the hip of one of the individuals. The researchers labeled him Individual 229.2. They found a white earthenware clay pipe.
And not just any pipe. This thing had traces of soot, meaning it was well used. But more importantly, it bore a very specific maker's mark stamped right onto the heel.
It was a crowned rose and the monogram RW.
Right.
But wait, it's smoking pipe? You're telling me a random piece of historical trash gives you a precise timeline.
Well, calling it a piece of trash really understates how crucial this is for archaeologists.
Fair enough.
That RW stamp traces back to Reichard West. He was a known pipe maker operating out of Mannheim, Germany, and historical records show he was active right around 1650 to 1675.
Oh, wow. That is a tight window.
What's fascinating here is how such a fragile, mundane object becomes the absolute chronological anchor for this entire study.
Right, because clay pipes back then weren't built to last.
Not at all. In the 17th century, they were highly breakable. Their average lifespan was like less than 3 years.
So it's not like a family heirloom you pass down for decades. It's essentially a 17th century burner phone.
Pretty much, yeah. You buy it, you smoke it, you drop it, it shatters, you get a new one.
That's amazing. So finding this specific clay pipe next to this victim is like finding a time-stamped receipt in their pocket. It locks the tragedy perfectly into that 1665 to 1670 window.
Which matches the archival records for Switzerland's last major plague outbreak perfectly.
Okay, so the pipe gives us the when. It tells us when the dirt was moved. But that immediately forces a much heavier question. Who are the people buried underneath it?
And the demographics of this group are, they're honestly heartbreaking.
Yeah, I was reading the osteoarchaeological report. When they examined the remains, the average age of death for these 15 people was just 17.7 years old.
The youngest was only 3 or 4.
And only 4 of the 15 had even survived past the age of 20.
Right. And in a normal cemetery, one that represents natural death over decades, you expect the mortality curve to look like a U.
Meaning lots of babies and lots of old people.
Exactly. You see a lot of very young infants, and you see the elderly. But seeing a massive localized spike in the death of teenagers and young adults,
That's an immediate red flag.
huge red flag. It points to a catastrophic mortality event.
But what really stunned the researchers wasn't just how young they were. It was the severe physical trauma etched into their bones.
Yeah.
Despite being so young, this group had an exceptionally high index of skeletal frailty, or ISF.
Right, the ISF. It's a metric bioarchaeologists use to measure the cumulative wear, tear, and physiological stress on a body.
What kind of things does it track?
It tracks things like bone density changes
Yeah.
and specific lesions on the skeleton.
Hmm.
You expect a high ISF in an 80-year-old who has worked their whole life.
Right.
You absolutely do not expect it in a 16-year-old.
It's like looking at their skeletons and finding a high mileage odometer on a brand new car. It just doesn't make any sense.
And to push that car analogy even further, it wasn't just that the miles were high, it's that they were driving on shattered axles.
Yeah.
100% of them had cavities.
Mhm.
And back then, lacking modern dentistry, that didn't just mean a quick filling.
No, that meant chronic pain.
Chronic pain and a constant draining low-grade infection.
Okay.
Plus, 61% of their teeth showed enamel hypoplasia.
Okay, I saw that term in the study. What exactly causes that kind of scarring on the teeth?
Well, teeth grow a bit like tree rings, right?
Okay.
If a child suffers from severe starvation or a massive life-threatening infection, their body makes a really ruthless calculation.
It shuts down non-essential stuff.
Exactly. It halts tooth enamel production entirely to conserve energy just to keep the vital organs running.
Wow.
And when the crisis passes and production starts again, it leaves a permanent transverse line, or a scar, right on the tooth.
And the bands on these individuals showed what?
They showed they suffered severe, near-fatal stress between the ages of 3 and 6.
Just a horrific childhood. And it gets worse because the teenagers exhibited something called spondyloarthrosis deformans.
Which is degenerative spinal joint disease.
Basically arthritis of the spine in teenagers.
Yeah. Plus, 2 of the individuals had dental wear patterns, proving they were habitually using their teeth as tools, probably grasping or pulling heavy materials.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the why behind all this damage becomes tragically clear.
A labor condition.
Exactly. These physical markers are the undeniable signature of relentless child labor. In the early modern period, the concept of childhood as like a protected time of play and learning,
That just didn't exist for the poor?
it didn't exist at all. Lower-class children were forced into strenuous, physically destructive work from an incredibly young age just to survive.
They weren't sitting in a classroom. They were carrying heavy loads, doing repetitive manual labor that literally warped their growing spines.
And chronic overexertion means your immune system is constantly compromised.
Right.
Their bodies were already exhausted, inflamed, and practically broken before the plague even arrived at the city gates.
So we have 15 teenagers with the skeletons of 80-year-olds. Their immune systems are totally shattered.
But hard work doesn't put you in a mass grave overnight. Something had to push them over the edge.
A final blow.
Exactly. And the only way the researchers could find that microscopic murder weapon was to crack open the one part of the body that acts like a biological time capsule, the teeth.
Yes, because the dental pulp chamber is incredibly dense. It actually protects DNA from environmental degradation for centuries.
That's so cool.
It really is. So the team extracted ancient DNA from the teeth of these victims, and they performed shotgun sequencing to find out exactly what was in their bloodstream when they died.
Hold on, shotgun sequencing. That sounds incredibly violent for a microscopic process. How exactly do you shotgun a 400-year-old tooth?
Well, the name is actually a really great descriptor of the process.
Okay.
Instead of trying to read a long strand of DNA from start to finish, which is impossible anyway because old DNA degrades and breaks into these tiny pieces over centuries.
Right, it's basically shredded.
Exactly. So instead, scientists essentially blast the DNA into millions of random overlapping fragments, like the spread of a shotgun blast.
Ah, I see.
Then they use these super powerful computers to look for overlapping patterns in those tiny fragments, and they stitched the puzzle pieces back together to reconstruct the genome.
And when they stitched those pieces back together, what they found was Yersinia pestis.
The plague bacterium.
Yeah, it was definitively confirmed in at least 5 of the individuals. But the data they got from individual 229.2 our person buried with the clay pipe,
Right.
that was exceptionally high quality. They were actually able to map the entire genome of the bacterial strain that killed him.
And when they mapped this specific Basel strain, they found it clustered genetically with plague outbreaks that happened in London and in Marseille around the exact same era.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because tracking the genetic mutation of this ancient bacteria across Europe, it's like tracing the software updates of a deadly historical virus.
That is exactly the right framework.
Yeah.
You are looking at the patches and the updates to the pathogens code. And the most revealing detail in this particular software update was a distinct depletion in something called the plague gene.
Okay, the plague gene. How does that change the bacteria's code?
So the plague gene acts as the bacteria's pair of chemical scissors.
Scissors?
Yeah. Normally, when the plague enters the lungs, the human body tries to trap it by forming blood clots around it. It's a defense mechanism.
Makes sense.
But the plague gene produces an enzyme that cuts through those blood clots.
Oh, wow.
Right. It cuts through, allowing the plague to escape the lungs and just flood into the bloodstream.
So it breaks out.
Exactly. A mutation or depletion in this gene region is a known genetic hallmark of post-Black death strains.
Meaning what, exactly?
It means the bacteria was actively altering its fundamental break-and-enter strategy compared to that massive apocalyptic wave of the 14th century.
Though, obviously, for the people in grave 229, even with a different break-and-enter strategy, it was still 100% lethal. So they have the pathogen's exact genetic signature. But the researchers didn't stop at the biology of the disease. They also wanted to know about their daily lives right up until the end.
Right. Specifically their diet.
Yeah, so they ran a stable isotope analysis on the bones, focusing on carbon and nitrogen levels. Now, I've seen the term C3 plants in the sources, but what does that actually mean for what they were eating every day?
Well, stable isotopes tell us what building blocks the body used to create bone tissue. So carbon isotopes reveal the types of plants they were eating.
Okay.
A C3 plant diet means they were eating things like wheat, barley, and rye, as opposed to C4 plants, which would be things like millet or corn.
Got it. And the nitrogen.
Nitrogen isotopes tell us about protein consumption and basically where they sat on the food chain.
And the results were kind of surprising, right? Because they weren't starving to death, at least not in terms of raw calorie.
No, the isotopes showed they were getting a steady diet of those wheat and barley staples, along with animal protein from sheep, goats, and pigs.
But there is a catch.
There's a big catch. The nuance is in how the body processes that food. While the baseline diet was pretty similar across the group, the researchers noticed slight isotopic variations in some of the children.
Specifically, altered nitrogen levels.
Right.
But if they were all eating roughly the same food, why would their nitrogen levels fluctuate like that?
Because stable isotopes don't just record what you swallow, they record your metabolic state.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. During episodes of severe physiological stress, like a chronic inflammatory disease or a prolonged fever, the body basically starts consuming its own tissues to survive.
It gets itself.
Literally, this biological cannibalism alters the nitrogen isotope ratios. So those spikes in the teenagers weren't a sign of a different diet.
They were the chemical signatures of their bodies fighting and failing to stay healthy.
Precisely.
It is incredible. By combining pathogenomic DNA with dietary isotopes and skeletal forensics, they created this highly detailed biological profile of people who are otherwise completely erased from written history.
These were truly the invisible youths of Basel.
So we have the murder weapon, the plague, and we have the victim's medical history. Now we need to look at the society that locked them in the room with the killer.
The social context.
Right. How did 17th century Basel dictate who lived and who died?
Well, it comes down to a societal pressure that researchers call presentism.
Presentism, like having to be present at work.
Exactly. We usually think of sick people resting in bed. Yeah.
Taking a sick day.
But for these youths, staying in bed meant starvation. Financial ruin was perceived as just as deadly as the plague itself.
They just couldn't afford to take a day off.
They simply couldn't. So they went to work sick. They kept carrying heavy loads, interacting with others, while actively infected with the plague.
Which drastically increased transmission.
And it entirely prevented their own bodies from recovering.
You hear 17th century hospital, and you probably picture a place where doctors, treat the sick, a public service.
Right, but that wasn't the case at all.
No. The researchers point out that the Bürgerspital, the main hospital right next to where they were buried, it wasn't a modern public health clinic. It was essentially an exclusive club.
They had incredibly strict admission policies.
Yeah, they only accepted patients who had full municipal citizenship status in the city or those who had the direct financial backing of an established employer.
Medical care in early modern Europe was absolutely not a universal right. It was a privilege, and it was deeply tied to your social capital.
So what does this all mean? When you look at people forced to work while sick because they can't afford a day off and a healthcare system completely tied to your employment,
Yeah.
is this basically the 17th century equivalent of essential workers lacking paid sick leave?
In many ways, it is a direct parallel. The researchers explicitly link these 17th century dynamics to what we all recently witnessed during the modern COVID-19 pandemic.
The parallels are definitely there.
The study demonstrates that the social determinants of health wealth, citizenship status, access to support networks, these things have been dictating human survival rates for centuries.
It completely destroys the myth of the great equalizer. The virus might not care who you are, but society absolutely does.
Yeah.
Society builds the barricades, and society decides who gets to hide behind them.
This raises an important question about how we view vulnerability, too. It wasn't just a simple binary of the rich versus the poor.
Right. It's more complicated than that.
The inequality was highly intersectional. There was a brutal hierarchy even within the lower classes.
How so?
Well, two people could be equally poor doing the exact same back-breaking labor. But if one was a citizen of Basel and the other was an immigrant from the countryside,
Their chances of surviving the plague were completely different.
entirely different. Social respectability and legal status were literal matters of life and death.
It is a really sobering reality to uncover. So, to summarize our journey today, we started with the comforting myth that viruses don't discriminate.
Which we now know is false.
Right. Because through a single, fragile clay pipe acting as a historical burner phone, the extraction of centuries-old plague DNA and the worn, arthritic bones of teenagers buried in a Basel monastery, that myth has been dismantled.
It wasn't just bacteria that killed these youths.
No. It was an economic system that worked them to the bone and a social system that offered them almost no safety net.
It is a really powerful reminder that our biology and our sociology are never truly separate. The scars of inequality are quite literally written into the human skeleton.
Which leaves us with one final, very dark thought to ponder.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, the Bürgerspital Hospital had strict rules. They only took in citizens or those with an employer vouching for them. But the historical sources also mention a much crueler policy.
The expulsions.
Yeah. Domestic servants and non-citizens who fell sick were sometimes outright expelled from the city, driven out the gates.
Left to fend for themselves in the surrounding countryside while actively suffering from the plague.
Think about the implications of that. If the 15 battered, overworked bodies found in these hospital graves represent the privileged poor.
The ones who actually had just enough social capital to be admitted to the hospital to die in a bed.
Exactly. If they are the lucky ones, what happened to the undocumented? What happened to the expelled and the entirely unprotected?
It's just terrifying.
How much darker is the invisible history of those who were simply cast out the city gates when the plague arrived?
It is a chilling thought,
Yeah,
and one the archives may never fully answer.
it really is. Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Keep questioning the narratives of history, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.